Well, what if I wanted to buy a digital version of what I like so that I have access to it even if I'm not connected to the internet? And I
Hmm.
started Googling and I found out that people still buy music on iTunes, which
Hmm.
I was like, what? Like, I does it even exist? I didn't know that at all. The I Did Not Know That podcast would like to thank Tim Atlas and Lauren Sanderson for sharing some of their music with us today. You'll be hearing it throughout the episode. All right, so hi everyone. Today we're here with Leah, and we're going to talk about the music industry. So I met Leah just like I met most of my guests very randomly. I was on a video call. I guess it was a virtual meetup, I would say, from the Media and Entertainment Club at the Ross School of Business while I was there on exchange. And Leah is at NYU Stern studying
Yep.
right now, and she'll tell you more about herself. But we were on this call and we had mutual interests, and we started talking and we spoke after the call and decided that this would be a great opportunity to have her come and talk about the music industry, which she loves so much. So, Leah, before we get started, how about you introduce yourself to our audience and then we'll kick it off?
Sure. Hey, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm so stoked to be here. I'm Leah. As Sam said, I am currently wrapping up a dual master's in public policy and business, but I've spent 7 years in the music industry. I've seen it all from kind of strategic planning and big picture stuff to working on the day-to-day operations of artists. And before school, I was at Spotify, Disney, and I currently manage two independent artists. So lots to speak about.
Yeah, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So, I mean, this is one of those topics where I don't know if it makes sense to say what it is, right?
Yeah.
Everybody listens to music, everybody knows that there's a process that goes behind making and putting out music. But I guess unless you're actually in it, there are some elements that you may not actually think about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So in that light, when we talk about the music industry, what exactly are we talking about? Is it just the making of music, or is it a particular, I don't know, dimension of the music world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say the music industry covers everything from the making of it to getting it into people's ears and also like live, so in front of
Mhm.
them. So the making of it has a bunch of different aspects in terms of, the recording artist, like you'll see like Beyonce, but there's a lot of songwriters and producers that also go into it. There's also like engineering to record it, mixing and mastering, all of that.
Mhm.
And then, of course, there's physical distribution. So, getting it on digital platforms, getting it printed, vinyl, CDs, all of that stuff. And then everything that kind of goes into like, I don't know, distributing the music to people.
Mhm.
So labels and distributors who are the ones sort of getting the music once it's recorded onto websites like Spotify.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's live. So booking live shows all over the world.
Yeah.
And I feel like all of that from beginning to end is what I consider the music industry.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. And I could work with that. And I think I want to say that our listeners could work with that as well. All right. So you talked about a few things inside of there, right? You talked about recording, you talked about songwriters, you talked about the engineers, but there's a lot of people involved. When you
Yep.
think of if you just think of your favorite song, there's probably hundreds of people involved in that process, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So who would you say, like, some of the roles that you would want to highlight? Of course, there's the actual artist, even it's if it's a musician or an actual singer, right? Because you
Mhm.
have music without words in it. But yeah, so who would you say are the most influential players or actors within the process of making music?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say there's a lot of different ones to highlight, and I'll kind of cherry pick a couple based on my experience and expertise. One role
Hmm.
that I think is quite interesting is an artist manager, which is what I do for like my work. And that is sort of like the CEO of the artist business. So they're overseeing everything from the label to the agents to like the strategy and the budgeting.
Hmm.
And so I think that's kind of an interesting overview role. I think like the life of a producer is really interesting because they kind of work behind the scenes a lot, and most people don't really know who they are. You don't know them by name.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, also I think kind of a like the label is an interesting place to look as well, like what the label looks like. So happy to kind of double click into each of those roles.
Yeah. So that is interesting because I didn't think about an artist manager differently to what I thought an agent would have been. Like I thought it would
Mm,
have been the same person.
yeah.
But I guess it makes sense. Like how would you differentiate those two roles?
Totally. And it's also there, the words are kind of funny because also, like, when you think about film and TV, like a TV agent kind of
Hmm.
operates similar to what a music manager is. So the words are a little bit weird, but it's quite delineated in the music industry. So agents book all the live stuff. So for example, I'm an artist manager, so we'll say my artist Tim will have an album out at the end of May.
Hmm.
And I say, like, okay, I think we should do a tour in the summer or in the fall to promote the album, right? I call up the agent. There's big
Okay.
agents at, like, there's a few different big agencies like UTA, WME, like CAA. I'll call up the agent and be like, hey, we want to book some tour, and we'll work together to figure out what that tour looks like. So should it be 10 days? Should it be 20 days? Where are the key markets based on data that we should be touring? And then they'll take that and run with it. And they'll book all the shows. So they'll call the venues, figure out when they're available, all that stuff. And they take 10% of gross revenue generated through ticket sales on the
Okay.
tour. And so then that kind of feeds back into the manager's strategy, but the manager themselves doesn't have to do all the like routing and calling the venues and figuring out the availability.
Okay. All right. I get that. Okay.
Yeah.
So when we think about we think about the process of creating a song.
Hmm.
Um let's talk about, I guess, a vocal song, a song with words as an example. There's a songwriter involved who is sometimes the artist,
Hmm.
sometimes not, and sometimes they work together, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so once this song is out there, and I would imagine that sometimes music comes before the words. When I say, like, someone might come up with an idea for a song and sing it into their phone or something before they
Hmm.
actually go through the process of writing. So once that happens, where the song is created, what are the steps that really happens from then to when it's in the ear of the audience, like myself?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting you mentioned all the different ways a song can get created because it's so true. I mean, it just depends on the artist and the song. You know, there'll be times where, like you said, an artist will wake up in the middle of the night with a melody in their head and like kind of just hum into their phone. Or there's artists kind of similar, like I don't know if you know Arlo Parks, who's like a poet who writes incredible like lines of verse and then sort of decides that maybe one of them should be a song. And so it just really depends. I would say, like, kind of to illustrate one process. So maybe an artist kind of has an idea for a song, and they'll have like a chorus or they'll have sort of a melody in their head.
Mhm.
So they'll usually have a couple like trusted collaborators that they'll go to. So say like maybe another songwriter. So the two of them will get into the studio, maybe with a producer, and start just like working on it and workshopping like what is the song about, what kind of words and phrases and emotions do you want to convey in the song, and they'll maybe like kind of work with make an outline or some lyrics or something, and then a producer will sort of drive like the sound of it, like make it sort of come to life and be like what are kind of like the drums and the beats that we want to put in here.
Mhm.
How do we want it to like convey, like do we want it to be like big and like fill up a room, do we want it to be quiet and haunting, and kind of work on that. And it's a very collaborative and iterative process. People will bring in different collaborators based on different sounds and directions they want to go, but I find that a lot of artists have a couple trusted people that they work with like again and again.
Okay. All right. And then, of course, once it gets produced,
Hmm.
um, it goes somewhere. I mean, in these days, it's all digital, right? It's different to, in the past, when they actually recorded onto tape that somebody would take somewhere. But now I believe everything is done digitally.
Yeah, it is. And it's such a this is like a weird part of the music industry, and I hope I don't sort of bore you with this, but there's so many different ways to get your music out there. Everything from sort of like baseline distributors. So to name a few of them, there's like TuneCore, CD Baby, DistroKid. These pretty much charge like a flat fee. It's like $10 or something like that. And you can upload your song, and then they'll like push it out to Spotify, Apple Music. You can't upload directly to Spotify, Apple Music. So They're called distributors, and what they do is they sort of put the music on the global DSPs, digital service providers, and then they collect your royalties and aggregate them, and then make sure you get paid. Because for every Spotify and Apple Music in the U.S., there's like different ones in Korea and Japan. So they push it all out and then aggregate it back in, which is a huge service to artists. So that's sort of a baseline distribution. Certain artists can go kind of bigger. So there's distributors that take a percentage of royalties. So some examples are like STEM, Downtown, AWOL. There's other big ones, and they provide more services. So they'll maybe do more pitching to Spotify playlisting, or they'll give you some money for marketing, or they'll do some PR services. But in return, they take a percentage of
Mm-hmm.
your what royalties you generate. And then on the other end of the spectrum are like the labels, the big labels, and they take between 50 to 80% of the royalties you're generating, leaving like the minority to the artists. But they provide a like more robust suite of services. So they might do radio promotion. They might give you $30,000 to make a music video. Those are the kind of services they provide. And I think a lot more people know the names of the labels like Universal, Warner, Sony,
Yeah.
and then there's a bunch of indie labels as well. So that's kind of an artist can choose what's the best option for them in their career for how
Okay.
they get the music to listeners.
Okay. And this is, of course, the artists who are trying to, I guess, become mainstream, or can you do all of this as an independent artist who's not represented, or just, you just want to make music and put it out there? Can you do this on your own as well?
100%. Yeah. So any artist can pretty much just like make some music and upload it through the baseline distributors like the DistroKid, the TuneCore.
Mm-hmm.
I would say like as an independent artist, you can also, email anybody. You can email AWOL, you can email Universal, you can see if they kind of like the music and want to represent it. But I will say, like, it does take a bit of knowledge and strategy to know what's best for you because I caution artists against sort of just giving up 10% or more of their royalties
Mm-hmm.
without, being in a space where it makes sense and the investment in themselves makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, so we're going to jump into some technical terms, but inside of there, we were talking about, right now, like we talked about the digital experience, right?
Hmm.
But before we go forward and talk about more of the intricate parts and things like royalties and all that, what if we could talk a little bit about the history of the industry? Because, like we said at the beginning, music, everybody knows music, right? It's been around as long as somebody realized that, oh, when I hit these two things, it sounds pleasurable to my ear.
Yeah.
But where, if you know, because I don't even know how someone would answer this question, like, where do you think it went from people just making music to then them creating an industry around it? When we say industry, because it's like a profession for some, right? So
Yeah.
how did we get there?
Yeah. Such a good question. I don't know for sure, but I have a pretty decent understanding or kind of guess of Pierre. But, like you said, people have been making sounds, making music for pleasure, for whatever, for however long the world has been here. Um, I can kind of date the recorded or the music industry back to like kind of concert halls. So if you imagine sort of like Beethoven or Bach, like you had to travel to see this person, right? So
Mhm.
imagine Beethoven would be playing in a concert hall and you would travel and you would pay X dollars to get in to see them, right? There was no recorded music industry at that time. So it's not like there was like a CD or a printed thing. Like that was the only way to experience music and that was a
Mhm.
paid thing. So I think where the modern music industry probably began is when they were able to sort of print that music. So instead of you having to travel, they could sort of record and print it on like phonographs and stuff like that to be able to distribute and sell on a broader market. And as you kind of alluded to, the technology has changed so much where it used to be like, you had to like physically engrave it, the grooves for the
Mhm.
sound. And then it became, like tapes, CD, digital, all that stuff. But I feel like that's probably where the recorded music industry began.
Okay. Okay, yes, that makes sense. I often think about what life was like back then. I
Yeah.
went just recently I went to a theater hall in Barcelona, and it was a newer artist who did a version of an older um musical showcase.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of took newer instruments because it was written for very classical instruments, and they took newer instruments and recreated it. But what I was thinking about when I went to this event, because we did it through school and we were able to have like a presentation before, and I was just imagining before we were able to record music, the only things that would pass around in the hands of musician was the actual sheets of music that were written.
Mhm.
And someone could have said, oh, this is mine, and gone to a new country where no one would have known what, where it came from or who was the original creator of this music.
Totally.
And it's kind of like when people talk about Shakespeare and say that he didn't write everything that he put out there, it's just he recorded that it came from him.
Hmm.
So that kind of brings me back to that question about royalties you were talking about.
Hmm.
For people who are very into music and follow the industry, they know it's important, and there's always this conversation around how the digital world is affecting royalties and all of that. But let's talk about it at its basic level. Like, what is royalties? How does it work, and how it ties in to the creation of music?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I mean, I feel like, yeah, copyright and royalties is so important in the music industry. And before I realized, I was like, I forgot to mention lawyers and how important they are, because they really are in terms of protecting like artists' intellectual property.
Yeah.
So, pretty much basically, when you have a song, imagine, I don't know, Good for You by Olivia Rodrigo, right? There are two sides to the song. And by sides, sort of, it's like where you collect your royalties. So, there's the master side, so the master recording, and that is like the performance. So Olivia Rodrigo will collect money on that because she is a performer, right? It's her song by Olivia Rodrigo, and that's where most of the royalties are generated. But there's also sort of the publishing side, so like the copyright, the underlying composition. So on that song Good for You, there are a couple of songwriters, a couple of producers, a lot of people who make up the composition of the song, and that generates royalties as well. And so it's like an interesting process how it decide like you decide who gets what royalties and how you split them up. But
Hmm.
the main takeaway is that there's like you collect royalties on both the master and the underlying composition. And so, say if Olivia Rodrigo were to cover, a Bob Dylan song, right? She would collect on the master side because she's the performer, but the underlying composition is belongs to Bob Dylan, so
Okay.
he would collect all the royalties on that
Okay.
song.
Okay.
So if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's kind of like equity.
It's kind of like equity, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think between the days of Bach and concert halls, like there's so much more copyright protection. We have what are called PROs, like performance right organizations, where you register your songs as you release them.
Mhm.
And then there's attorneys who are just like incredible at making sure like artists' intellectual property, like you see lawsuits in the news all the time where it's like songs seem pretty similar and like people are fighting it out because like the music is quite protected these days.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, I'll stop there. But there's a lot to say on also on that piece of
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, copyright.
Yeah. I understand why you're stopping. When I worked in event management in Trinidad, I remember there was one event that I was doing, and I had the task of making sure that the artists that we got permission to use the song for the duration that we wanted and the part of the song that we wanted. And I
Hmm.
remember thinking, how can they even measure this? Like, because this was for a live concert and we just needed uh, a a small piece of an international song, like a non-Trinidadian artist. We were going to use a piece of that song
Hmm.
for a portion of the concert.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember having to go to the copyright authority in Trinidad to request this, and then they were to reach out to an entity in the US to get the approval and all of that.
Hmm.
And to me, I was like, well, on one hand, how do you know if your music is being played if it's in another country or something and it's physically being played and not digitally being played? Like, how do you track these things? How
Hmm.
can people keep track of where their music is and how they should get royalties for it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I would say like 90% of the time, if it's being played like off a CD or even off of somebody's Spotify for commercial use, it's like you don't know. Like we don't know. And that is what it is. I will say there's a lot of different AI tools that are being created to kind of recognize a song, used in sort of a TikTok video or a YouTube video or something like that. So more on the digital side. But I think the real answer is that unless it's above a certain threshold of like financial gain,
Mhm.
so like the artists don't really care that much. So if, I would say most artists like wouldn't necessarily care if you're using it for like an event and it's not generating revenue, like that's not necessarily on their radar to be like kind of tracking um, that. that. And it's only if, it's like you see these songs in the news that are big hits that are under dispute, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I get that. And we haven't talked about YouTube yet.
Hmm.
And I wanted to just stick it in there because we did mention like Spotify and there's also Apple Music, based on your phone that you carry around with you. But
Hmm.
YouTube, I like to call YouTube as, the OG when it comes to music. And that is where a lot of people, when we went into the digital space, music started being coming from downloading MP3s on a
Hmm.
device and CDs and all of that to now having YouTube, which is also a visual medium.
Hmm.
So that is one thing I wanted to ask about the music industry. A lot of times, music came with music videos.
Hmm.
Now people spend less time on YouTube, more time walking around, listening on their phone. So, does the industry still invest a lot into the music video part as well?
It's a good question. Across the board, it's been less of an investment. Which is unfortunate because I think a lot of artists sort of have a creative vision for how they want it to look visually.
Mhm.
And it's hard. It's been hard, like from personal experience, getting labels to put the money in because like they just don't see the same return on investment, right?
Yeah.
So it's tough. I would say there has been less investment, but there also has been kind of an equal pushback from artists and managers being like, no, like this is important to like the creative process,
Yeah.
as well as there's been small sort of like innovations in terms of Spotify Canvas. So those like they're like an 8-second kind of looping visual you see,
Yes.
as well as TikTok helping people see snippets and videos. So I think there is still an importance of like strong visual content. Just like yeah, net it's been less than it has before.
Yeah. So now because it is an industry, it is a means of revenue. And we talked a little bit before about the different steps that the manager would have taken to be like, oh, let's go on tour, let's do this or that. Um, what are the ways that artists now make money from their music, whether it be musicians or singers? How are those revenues brought in? I could imagine tours and stuff and the streaming.
Hmm.
um but what are those elements that bring in revenue?
Yeah, a good question. And every artist is very different in how their revenue breakdown is. So let's talk about, I guess, streaming first. So streaming doesn't necessarily pay a lot per stream,
Hmm.
but it does aggregate to quite a bit for some artists. So the current kind of rate is like $3 to $4 for per 1,000 streams. So like per stream, it's less than a penny for sure. But if you can imagine an artist having a million, 10 million streams, that is a pretty decent monthly income.
Hmm.
Um, Touring is also a huge like revenue generator for certain artists, and for some artists it's not. So there's a kind of class of artists where they have a decent audience, they tour, but their tour expenses are quite high because an artist is when they're on tour, they're paying for their band, they're paying for the hotels, they're paying for the transportation, they're paying people a per diem fee even if they're not playing that day, and they're paying like a person to do the sound. So the expenses of tours are like really, really high, and it's actually only like a certain level of artist that is able to like recoup on those expenses and make money on tour, and a lot of pretty popular artists like still lose money or break even on tours, which is
Okay.
tough.
Yeah.
um, I would say there's kind of also a shift to more direct fan engagement. So I think when those two things might not be making the most money for artists, a lot of artists who have super fans do sort of Patreon or like, exclusive content for monthly subscribers or direct merch sales. And I feel like the artist to fan direct distribution and revenue is kind of one of those things that's like more, there's fewer costs associated with it. So it's more of a
Yeah.
direct revenue source for artists. But
Yeah.
everybody is kind of a different mix of different things.
Yeah. Okay. And when we talk about this music and all of that, and we talked about it before, but the actual way that artists put out music. So we know we have albums, right? And
Mhm.
albums used to be it before, as in when recorded music, you wouldn't just sell one song, you would sell a
Mhm.
collection of songs. Um, Now a lot of artists are also releasing singles
Mhm.
because it's easy to do that in the digital space. But could you talk a little bit about that, like that idea of putting out an album versus a single song only, and maybe touch a little bit on how that plays in to the industry and the decisions behind the business side of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're so right. Streaming has changed what the strategic decision should be. And it used to be album, and now, I mean, streaming sort of highlights singles in a way. It's like you could release an album, but maybe 10 of the tracks won't get as heard as the one target single that you pitch for playlisting. And, it's like oftentimes on these playlists, like New Music Friday or Hanging Out and Relaxing, it's only like one song per artist. So if you release a whole album, maybe only one really gets heard the most in that kind of format. Obviously, fans will listen to the whole album. But so I think it's more strategic. And what I advise a lot of my clients to do is do a lot of singles, like as many singles as kind of like the artist can stomach creatively, which make, it's like certain artists are like, I hate that idea. I hate like drip feeding my music to my fans. And I would rather just like give them an album as it's meant to be heard. And I'm like, great. Like if that's creatively what you feel like you want to do, like let's do that. Like I'm not going to force anybody to release singles. But I think right now singles are a really good way to get like the most eyes and ears on each individual song, like make sure it has its kind of time in the spotlight. It's also a really good way to like feed the algorithm in the way of, I mean, the algorithm is like a black box, right? But it's sort of best practices to release singles every like 5, 6 weeks to kind of like keep hitting your listeners, like, their algorithmic playlists, like their Discover Weekly and stuff like that. If you
Mhm.
keep putting singles, you'll be on those playlists consistently. And so to answer your question, it's kind of not like a straight answer, but I think singles and EPs are a bit more advantageous in the streaming world. But albums will always have such a special and amazing place creatively for like telling a story that
Mhm.
can't be replicated. And I just encourage my clients to do both.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And you said something there that I have always had a question about, and I don't know why I didn't just Google it. And maybe I did at some point and I forgot. What is an EP? What
Yeah,
does EP stand for?
yeah, it's a good question. So I think it stands for extended play. I think. Don't quote
Okay.
me on that. But pretty much what it is, I can tell you what I know what it is. I just don't know exactly what it stands for. It's a small package of five, like 4 to 7 songs. Whatever. It's a smaller package of songs. It's not an album. An album you'll think is like kind of like 10 to 14 songs or whatever. So an
Okay.
EP is a small package of songs. And the way a lot of my artists kind of think about EPs is it's like telling a mini story, right? So if they have sort of 5 songs that are sonically in the same world, they'll put them out as an EP. So as an example, one of the artists I managed, his name's Tim Atlas, and he just was in the studio. He wrote like 14 songs, and he was like, I love all of these, and they were all so good. But like 5 of them sort of shifted in more of like a night theme. They were like darker and grittier and more production forward. And so he packaged those as an EP because they're kind of sonically similar. And then 5 of them were more of like a day theme, like they were brighter and more cinematic and kind of like took you to an alternate universe. Like they're sonically so different. And so he packaged those as another EP. Um, and I think that's like a good way that artists are sort of, I don't know, telling a different story and then also creating a moment
Mm,
with an EP release that they can, use to promote a tour and engage with fans.
yeah. All right. So, I mean, we've covered a lot already, and I feel like we've got a good understanding of the industry, right? But something that's been recurring in our conversation is TikTok, right? We talked about TikTok and we talked about streaming because we do live in a digital world no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I will say that I'm very happy to see vinyl coming back. I grew up around it and I always wanted to collect my own.
Oh,
And I love the fact that it's coming back, and I intend to fill my house someday with all of my favorite albums.
I love that.
But we are living in a digital age, right? Since the advent of, I guess, MP3s. I don't know if that was the first digital. Was that the first digital version of music?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So since then, it's been progressing to the point where we have streaming. What what happens if I wanted to buy music now, right? The reason I asked this, a few weeks ago, I was just sitting and I'm living in Spain. And so when it comes to streaming movies and television series, there's a lot of things I cannot access because there's no permissions. And I said, well, what if I wanted to buy a digital version of what I like so that I have access to it even if I'm not connected to the internet? And I
Mm-hmm.
started Googling and I found out that people still buy music on iTunes,
Mm-hmm.
which I was like, what? Like, I does it even exist? And I went down this rabbit hole of looking and seeing how digital products, in terms of art, digital movies, music, the entertainment space, how it gets sold. But it no, I got no answer. As in, I came away still not knowing what happens if I want to buy music and own music in a digital form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question, and I think, I mean, the Google search probably was pretty accurate in terms of it is like iTunes is a big way you can still buy music, and it kind of goes into your iTunes library. Another really important one is Bandcamp.
Okay.
Like shout out to Bandcamp as being one of the like most artist friendly ways to buy music. So Bandcamp is kind of a mix between like an iTunes and a Patreon in a way, where it's like if I'm an artist, I can put my album on Bandcamp for you to download. And Bandcamp takes a small fee, but on certain days they take no fee whatsoever. So it's like a really good way for artists to like kind of sell stuff to fans directly. So
Hmm.
Bandcamp is a really good way, and then you can kind of like get your own digital download link. I mean, there's been a ton of stuff in terms of the, you know, blockchain space and the NFT space where people are
Hmm.
trying to innovate in that way of like you own a minted digital copy that's all yours and it's a collector item. It may be one of the first, all that stuff,
Yeah.
which has not quite gotten mainstream success yet, but is definitely an interesting part of the industry to watch. So yeah, those are kind of all the ways you can still buy digital music.
Okay.
And then of course you know there's physical music as well.
Okay. So for Bandcamp, for example, when you buy and download, are you able to play the music without needing to be on the Bandcamp platform, or will you always need internet to still stream what you bought?
No, so you can store it locally, like on your desktop. So you don't need internet. And I think also with your iTunes library, I think you don't need internet as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Well, good to know. I'll check them out and
Yeah.
see
Check out Bandcamp. It's
because yeah,
the
it's definitely a question I had, and uh yeah. Okay, and so now we have digital music, it's streaming, but we also have something called a reel on social media
best. Hmm.
that almost always goes along with a song.
Hmm.
So have you seen in the industry embrace this in terms of putting music out there? The reason I ask is recently, like I made a reel on TikTok, and a couple weeks later I got a notice that the audio was removed for copyright purposes, and I had to attach another qualified song that was not a mainstream song.
Hmm.
So can you talk a little bit about that, how the social media aspect plays into music remixing, ownership, copyright, all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So answer this question in a couple of different directions. Kind of like the TikTok, Reels, social media, music stuff. The industry has such a love-hate relationship with it, right? Because on one hand, it is such a cool opportunity for artists to be able to put their music out there and connect with fans like pretty directly. And you know, there are one artist I work with, her name's Lauren Sanderson, incredible artist, and has built just incredible following of people on TikTok and Instagram, and while retaining their independence, like doesn't need to sign to a label, doesn't need anything because of this direct fan connection that was facilitated through sharing their music on social
Okay.
media. And so that's such a gift. But yeah, like on the other hand, on like a bigger scale, I don't know if you've read in the news, but like TikTok and Universal Music Group are at odds because TikTok isn't really paying for the use of the music in a way.
Okay.
So like imagine Taylor Swift, your song gets used in a million different reels or TikToks, right? You probably want to get paid. TikTok is paying like negligible amounts while using the songs to like keep people engaged on the platform. So both of them sort of feel like they're providing more value to the other than they're getting,
Hmm.
because then kind of swinging the pendulum back, it's like if you're Taylor Swift, like TikTok is great because now all these people are hearing your music for the first time, right? Like on TikTok.
Yeah.
And so both of them think they're providing the most value, and they can't really find like a numerical amount that makes sense for both of them.
Yeah.
Um, and so it truly feels like a love hate there. To answer your questions on like copyright and royalties, like that's also sort of down to like the artist and the label and stuff. So I know for the artists I work with, like, people can use their audio, like this Tim or Lauren's audio in their reels and stuff, no problem. Because like that's what we want. We want the songs to spread and people to use it and get creative with it.
Mhm.
But like at Universal Music Group, all of the songs got taken down from TikTok. So you can't use
Okay.
them whatsoever. So
So
it really
that
comes
is what
down,
happened then, yeah.
yeah, that where what the goals are, the ethos behind it, what you're thinking on social media.
Hmm. I see. And is because TikTok is owned by ByteDance, and right now there is stuff happening in the US with regulations and all of that. But then you have Instagram, which is owned by Meta, aka Facebook. And there are reels on Instagram as well, in addition to Facebook stories or something.
Mm-hmm.
So is this the same scenario when it comes to Instagram and the other platforms, or is this problem that's happening right now? Is it specifically a TikTok problem?
So this is specifically a TikTok problem.
Okay.
I'm not an expert in this, but how I understand it is that each like entity has sort of a licensing deal. So Universal Music Group also has a licensing deal with Meta, and they ink out like how much like Meta pays Universal Music Group for using their music in a reel, like all those kind of bullet points.
Hmm.
And that deal seems to be solid. Like we haven't really heard much about it. It seems to be like they're in agreement, you
Yeah.
know? The issue is like the TikTok deal, which is completely
Yeah.
separate, is just not, they're not happy with it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for taking that question, because I was just curious, and I guess if persons are trying to get creative with music, if artists are trying to decide where they want to put their music, it's worth maybe finding somebody who could explain these things and help them look into what makes the most sense. About a week after recording this episode, TikTok and Universal did actually come to some agreement. There was a deal, and according to Reuters, they said that they will work together on campaigns supporting Universal Music Group's artists across genres and territories globally. So I guess they came to some agreement. This is not the focus of the episode, but I just wanted to drop this piece of information in and give you an update. Okay, and of course, in order to measure what is happening or to know what is happening, because you said, for example, a song might get 1 million plays or 1 million reels done with that song. And you also mentioned AI very early on when we were talking about measuring, you know, plays of a
Mhm.
song. So, in your experience right now, and AI is the big buzzword right now. Everybody's talking about it, so we'll talk about it. What do you see the role being beyond measuring the plays? How do you see it working its way into the industry? I was in a class yesterday, and we were talking about this, where you know, if an artist uses AI to create, is it still revered in the same way as not? And so, just curious what you've seen, what you feel, what you think about AI in the music industry.
Yeah. It's such early days, which is it's exciting and also kind of scary, but I see it playing a pretty big role in the creation process.
Mm.
I think it's really cool. I mean, if an artist is able to, so say a small artist, right? There's this process called mixing where you sort of record different components of a song, like the vocals, the guitar, whatever, and then a mixer who usually charges like anywhere from a few $100 to like thousands. Kind of like levels it off and makes it all that, right? Like AI can mix a song now, which is like very exciting. It can save small artists money that they might not have to pay a mixing engineer. And I think also it can be really cool in terms of if you don't know how to play, say, I don't know how to play the trumpet, but like I can AI generate a trumpet part maybe based on something that I hum. So I think it can be a really, really cool part of the creative process. And I'm like very pro AI, like artists using AI to like execute their vision. And I think artists are going to be doing some insane stuff with it. I'm just so stoked on that. And like my personal view is it doesn't affect the integrity of the art. I think an artist using a tool is similar to an artist using any tool that's available.
Okay.
Yeah, I think where it gets like a teeny bit tricky is like AI generated like likenesses of other people. So,
Mhm.
there was that song that was Drake's voice, but generated using AI.
Yeah.
And that's tricky on terms of like who gets paid, who has the rights. And right now it's pretty still clear legally that like that is illegal. And like Drake can sue them and take it down and everything. And that's pretty real. But I feel like that's going to be a lot worse and a lot murkier at some point for
Mhm.
sure. And I think also AI is going to be a helpful tool in terms of helping artists get paid and recognizing where their songs are being used. Because if you could imagine, say, like you're making a reel, right? And you're using a song, but you're talking over it. Maybe the dog is barking. AI can help, recognize when that underlying composition is being used and help artists tag and collect revenue on those things. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's where I'm seeing it right now.
Sounds good. Sounds really good. Thank you for that.
Of course.
So before we get into you, right? Because I do want to hear more about you and your relation to the music industry. You are a woman in the industry. And whenever I get the opportunity to being a woman of, mixed ethnicity, but also from the Caribbean and from Trinidad and Tobago, I always like to talk about diversity whenever I can in my episodes. And music is a universal language, right? We say this all the time. We have music coming from every corner of the world. But when you look at the music industry, a lot of times it's still dominated, like we were saying, right? There are some big players, there are some indie labels and all of that. But it takes money and it takes resources to produce good music, to promote music and all of that. So I guess my question is, what have you seen? What have you learned historically to now when it comes to a diverse group of people, both behind the music, but also making music? I feel like making music has been, in my eyes, equal. Like I have an equal number of favorite artists in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicities and location. But what do you see really being in that space, both the creative side and then the business side of it?
Yeah, such a good question, important question. So on the creative side, I tend to agree in terms of performing artists. You do see a lot of different artists of color, different, like gender representations. There is a slight bias towards men in terms of certain things about like festival lineups and stuff like that, but it's generally okay
Mm.
when you compare it to songwriters and producers. So in terms of like the producers and recording engineers, I believe it was 2% women.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's like a huge kind of gap in terms of gender diversity, like the kind of behind the scenes people making the
Mhm.
music, which is something that's been there's been a lot of different campaigns that have been quite proactive about it, and in the last few years, it has grown, which is really great. So something to kind of be mindful of. Um, in terms of the business side, I've seen that to be pretty white and male dominated, especially like when you look at teams behind rap artists, which is like you'll just like see like white dudes. You're like, why? Um, which is something that is just kind of been, from my perspective, a product of nepotism and the fact that this industry is quite favor based.
Mm.
So, for example, it's like that's just like how things get done, and that's like also kind of comes down to hiring when somebody needs an assistant or something. It's like your buddy at the label might recommend their son or something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
as well as the fact that a lot of internships in the music industry have been unpaid.
No.
So those favor people who have family money who can work unpaid,
Yeah.
and that historically has been white people.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely been more awareness and a bigger push to like ban unpaid labor, to like look at one's own staff and be like, where are we like over indexing, where are we under indexing, and try to hire. But it's like, frankly, on the business side, I feel like it's a very slow process to correct like years of bias in that direction.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. Like I said, I always like to bring it up when I can because it's important. I feel like in all of my experience in any space where there has been different groups of people, and not even just talking gender and ethnicity, but we're talking people of different backgrounds, people of different education levels.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody brings such a unique perspective that it makes the end product even better. So it's always great to do what we can to be inclusive and all of that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
All right, so now we get to the greatest part of this conversation where we get to talk about you a little bit more, and learn more about you. How did you get into this industry? Were you born into it? Were you, watching, I don't know, VH1 and MTV growing up and being like, hey, I want to do something in there? Like, how did you get to this point?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people in the music industry will have a similar story of like luck and chance and being in the right place at the right time. So I grew up definitely a big music fan. My dad, like played me vinyl records when I was a kid. I was always so interested in it, as did my older brother. And so but my parents like kind of encouraged me to, do well in school, make kind of a good living. And I never really saw the music industry as like a career path. That was not
Mhm.
really what was sort of told to me.
Mhm.
So, went to undergrad, did economics. But I sort of got my first start in music because I couldn't really afford the undergrad institution I was in. And so I graduated early and I had this free semester to do whatever I wanted. And I thought, you know what? Like, why don't I just work in music, take an internship in music if I can? It'll be fun. Like, this is not a real job, but it'll just be a good way to like hang around, learn some stuff.
Yeah.
I got so lucky because there was an alumni of my school who was working at Atlantic Records, and he was very overworked, did not have time to do like a full interview hiring process. So a professor put me in touch. He was like, "Look, I don't have time. If you want it, it's yours. Like, move to New York. If you want it, you can have it." And I was like, "Okay." So, uh, little old me took my last semester, moved to New York, interned at this record label, had like the time of my life. Um, I was in the A&R department, which is the department of people who are going to like kind of look for new signings, to the label. So I was, at a couple shows a night, really enjoying it, just like listening and just getting exposed to everything that was new. But then, of course, end of the semester rolled around. I had to start paying off my student loans. Like I was like, okay, time to go get a real big girl job. So that took me to LA, where I was working at Disney and doing corporate strategy and business development. Really not much to do with music at all. Just sort of like honing a lot of strategic and analytical skills. But I had such a good time and I just loved the music so much that I would spend my nights volunteering. And I was doing, if do you know So Far Sounds?
No.
They throw like shows in unique spaces around different cities. So it'll be
Okay.
like a basement or a rooftop or a garden or something like that. And I was volunteering, helping throw some shows. And one time I met this artist who was performing. His name was Tim Alice, and I was like, wow, like this is amazing songwriting. And I just wanted it to be heard by more people. I just like
Mhm.
this needs to be more ears. And so I offered to see if he needed any help using what I knew at labels. And he just kind of happened to accept and be like, yeah, I would love some help. So started managing him. And so that was kind of like a series of really lucky, right place, right time kind of things.
Yeah.
Um, and then I kind of solidified my work in music because Spotify happened to be looking for somebody with both a business background and an independent management background, and somebody who had connections in both the artist and management space.
Yeah.
And
It
so I
was
got,
just
again,
waiting for you.
yeah, quite lucky there that I happened to have both. Got hired at Spotify, and that's when I was just like, oh, I could literally make like pay my rent like
Yeah.
working in music, and like it really took me 20 something years to realize that. But that's kind of my story of how I got started.
Yeah, that's super cool. And always love to hear these stories because most times we say it's luck, but it's only luck if you were there for the luck to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it's a combination. But I mean, also in terms of privilege, like I was not getting paid my first internship. I was able to go and live in New York,
Yeah,
unpaid as well.
yeah,
So lots of privilege going there too.
yeah.
And yeah.
Okay, you could
Yeah.
drink your water now. Sorry, I was like, oh no, she's thirsty.
We're good. We're good.
Okay, so and that is great. And after I met you and you told me about Tim, I did listen to his songs. I actually like his music, like he has a new fan in me. So yeah, I do like follow him now on Spotify. So I do like his music. And you mentioned you now have a second artist that you manage,
Yeah, their name is Lauren Sanderson.
Lawrence.
Based out of LA, is like an alt pop rock, like incredible. I mean, I feel like big things. It's just like the new music that's coming. I'll
Yeah,
send it to you. It's just really great stuff. So
yeah, yeah.
I know exactly what I'm doing. So let's just say that you've been warned. Can you hurry up and make me? Cause I'm getting kinda bored.
Then, Leah, if someone is listening to us talking today and, they're like, man, I see myself in Leah, or, I really want to get into this space in some way. We talked about right place, right time. We talked about being able to access, right, the opportunity to do it, to get in. But given what you see in the world and how you see things are happening right now, what would you advise someone? Maybe they've never tried, but I mean, a lot of people love music, right? But let's say they really, really are passionate, they want to be part of the process. What would you tell them to do, either from the artist side or from someone that wants to be more on the managerial side, business side?
Yeah, good question. So a couple different things. Number one, it sounds a bit silly and derivative to say, but like just do it in your free time. Because you won't, you'll just be sort of volunteering at a show or, recording music on your guitar, but like what you're doing in your free time, it is building skills and it is building experience that if there does happen to be an opportunity for like a job or something like that, like you'd surprise yourself how qualified you can be just by sort of doing something in your free time and like presenting it as being like, I'm doing it, this is the work. So I'd say like pursue it in your free time at whatever scale you can. So if it's just like managing a friend's band or something like that, just do it. The second is there is an incredible amount of organizations that are popping up that are for people at a small level. So one organization I love is called the Digitalog, and they have like free events and courses and networking things. And these parties are called no ego parties, where you can just show up and like network with people in the music industry. And the whole idea is that like they're open to everyone at every level. So definitely check out organizations like that. They're like one of the leaders in equity in this business.
Hmm.
And I would say the third is like keep making noise and putting yourself out there. Like feel free to contact me. I can put my info wherever you need it. But like reach out, send the cold email, keep putting yourself out there. Like you'll probably get a lot of no's. Things will be ignored, whatever, but you never know who's going to say yes. So like keep pushing and don't give up.
Yeah. This has all been great, Leah. Before we wrap up today, I just wanted to ask you, you are in this industry now, right? It's your profession, you enjoy it, you love it. Where do you see the future of the industry going when you think about everything that's happening in the world right now, technology and regulations and all of these things?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see the music industry in the next few years?
Yeah. So I see it kind of moving into different ways that I'll explain that kind of converge. But the first one is I see the barrier to entry for musicians lowering more and more. Like with AI and technology, I think pretty much anyone can be a musician. And with a bunch of different distributors kind of offering the same thing, like it's cheaper and cheaper to put your music out into the world. So I think the barrier to entry will be lower, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think that kind of floods an already crowded market where I see it getting harder and harder to get ears. And like get fans and stuff. And I see like right now how it's kind of been is that, there's still like superstars, things that go viral, Taylor Swift accounted for 2% of the whole recorded music industry, which is so much. So it's like, I still see sort of that getting worse in terms of hard to get ears. And then once you do, it's sort of like superstar status in a way. And so because of that, I think where I see the music industry going is that it's going to be very like brand focused. So it just won't be enough to have really good music anymore. Like that will just be the standard. Like you need to have good music, but you need to build like a full on sort of like creative direction in terms of your brand and what you're offering and all that kind of stuff in the same way I think Taylor Swift has. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of a way to break through. So I don't know if that's like a hopeful or not hopeful thing in the music industry. But that is sort of the way I see it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And everyone listening, if you're looking for a way to break in, maybe this is your way. Offer some branding services for artists moving forward.
Yeah, totally.
Have a lot of work to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Creative direction is super important.
Yeah. All right. Well, Leah, thank you so much for spending this time and talking with me today about the music industry. We are just about done. Do you have any final words for our listeners, or you could tell them how to find you?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been super fun. Feel free to reach out to me. Instagram is probably easiest. It's at Leah Kraft, Leah, and then Krft. There's no A in the Instagram handle. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me there if you need anything. And I mean, I'm just really excited for the next generation of music, like musicians and music industry professionals. And so just rooting for you. I'm excited.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
I said I was a freak, I was lying. Happy all day, now I can't stop crying. Anything you wanted, would've tried it. Now every time you hit me up, I kinda wanna die. Tuesday, you said you don't wanna see me again. You don't wanna see me more than a friend. Now you can't get me out of your head. I know you can't lose control. I know I can't let you go. Can't let you go.